Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, it's not just a book, is it? It's really a testament to the human spirit's incredible ability to find light in the absolute darkest of places. It's a story of how a psychiatrist, who was stripped of literally everything he had, discovered this profound theory about what keeps us going right in the heart of a concentration camp. So let's dive into what he found. You see, this single idea, which Frankl often quoted from Nietzsche, is the very core of his entire philosophy. It's the key that unlocks how some people, against all odds, manage to survive unimaginable horrors. And it's the central question we're going to explore here. What is that why that makes almost any how bearable? So the whole story kicks off at the gates of Auschwitz. For Frankl and millions of others, this wasn't just a physical arrival. It was the beginning of a systematic process designed to just rip away every single shred of their humanity, to reduce them to what he called naked existence. This was Viktor Frankl's new name. His identity, his profession as a doctor, his family, his friends, all of it was just erased and replaced with this. Every personal thing he owned was gone. He wasn't a person anymore, he was a number. As he stood there, having lost everything you could possibly imagine, Frankl would eventually realize that there was this one thing the Nazis could never, ever take from him. But, he wasn't there yet. First, he had to survive the initial psychological shock of just arriving. Frankl noticed that pretty much every prisoner went through 3 distinct psychological phases. It started with the period of admission, right, which was just defined by overwhelming shock. This would later give way to this deep, soul-crushing apathy. And then finally, for those who actually survived, this really strange and difficult experience of liberation. Let's start with that first one, shock. When they arrived, prisoners clung to what Frankl called a delusion of reprieve. This desperate hope that maybe things might not be as bad as they seemed. Well, that illusion was shattered instantly by the finger game. An SS officer would just casually point a finger left or right. Right meant you go to work, left meant the gas chambers. About 90% of Frankl's transport was sent to the left. Their lives were over within hours. In this last-ditch effort to save a piece of his old self, Frankl was clutching the only thing he had left, a manuscript that contained his entire life's work. It wasn't just paper, It was his identity as a scientist, as a doctor. He secretly showed it to a seasoned prisoner hoping for some advice, any way to possibly save it. That was the reply, just one word. And that single, brutal word had a devastating impact. It was more than just a curse. It was the sound of his entire former life being flushed away. It was the final, brutal confirmation. Nothing from your past matters here. And right there, in that moment of absolute, total loss, the first phase of shock reached its turning point. Once everything was gone, his manuscript, his name, his family, a strange kind of freedom started to emerge. A grim sense of humor, a sort of detached curiosity. Because, really, when you have absolutely nothing left to lose, fear itself starts to change. Okay, so out of this abyss of total loss, Frankl makes what is maybe the single most important discovery of his life. He found something that could not be taken away, could not be burned, and could not be beaten out of him. He realized that life in the camp was a battle fought on 2 fronts. On one side, you've got all the external forces, the constant suffering, the hunger, the brutality, all trying to crush you. But on the other side, you have this inner power, your attitude, your dignity, your spiritual freedom. The SS could control the first, but he realized they could never, ever touch the second. And here it is. This is the central idea of the entire book. Quote, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. You can't choose your circumstances, but you can always choose your response. That, Frankl discovered, is the last and greatest of our freedoms. So realizing he had this freedom of choice was one thing, but it begged a really crucial question. Why bother? Why choose dignity when you're surrounded by complete despair? To exercise that freedom, Frankl realized a person needed a reason, a purpose. They needed to find meaning in the suffering itself. Frankl often thought about this quote from Dostoevsky. The point wasn't to avoid suffering. That was impossible. The real challenge was to bear it in a way that had meaning. To prove that even in this hell, you could achieve something. You could be worthy of the trial you were facing. Through his observations, Frankl kind of zeroed in on three main paths to finding this meaning, even in a place like Auschwitz. You could find it through love, through a purpose or a future goal, and finally, in the attitude you chose to take toward your own unavoidable suffering. And for Frankl, maybe the most powerful of these sources, the one that really hit home for him, was love. He discovered that just thinking about a loved one was a force so incredibly powerful, it could actually transcend the physical reality of the camps. Frankl tells this one story about a particularly brutal moment. He's stumbling for miles on a death march in the freezing dark, getting beaten by guards, and his mind just escapes. He starts having these vivid imaginary conversations with his wife. He could see her smile, he could hear her voice answer him, and in those moments, the horrific reality of the march just kind of faded away. And in that moment, he understood something fundamental. He didn't even know if his wife was still alive at that point, but it didn't matter. The love he felt was for her inner self, her spiritual being. And this inner love was a reality that was more powerful and more enduring than physical presence or even death itself. So this profound personal experience, forged in the fires of Auschwitz, it wasn't just a survival hack, It became the foundation of a whole new school of psychotherapy that Frankl would spend the rest of his life developing and teaching to the world. He called it logotherapy. It comes from the Greek word logos, which basically means meaning. And the central idea is super simple, but at the time it was totally revolutionary. The primary driving force in us humans isn't the search for pleasure, but the search for meaning. With this idea, Frankl was basically throwing down the gauntlet to the big psychological theories of his day, especially Freud's. See, Freud had argued that we're all driven by a will to pleasure. But Frankl, having seen humanity at its absolute worst, countered that and said, no, that's just not the whole story. People who had a meaning to live for could endure immense pain. What truly drives us, he insisted, is a will to meaning. And this is where Frankl's work just becomes so incredibly relevant for us right now. He warned that a society that's losing its grip on meaning would suffer from what he called an existential vacuum. This void, he argued, is the root cause of so many of our modern problems. Widespread boredom, anxiety, addiction, and that gnawing feeling that life is just pointless. So, to cut through all that despair, Frankl had this method that was, it was shockingly direct. He wouldn't ask patients, what's wrong? He would ask them this stark question. It sounds harsh, I know, but its purpose was brilliant. It forced them to confront the threads, no matter how slender, that still tied them to life. In their answers, whether it was love for their kids, a talent they still had to use, or memories worth preserving, in those answers lay the flicker of meaning. That was the starting point. So the final takeaway here is to turn that incredibly powerful question on ourselves. In the face of our own struggles, big or small, what is the answer that keeps this going? What is your why?